Okay. Do you want ladies first?
Sure. My name is Samantha Schilling Robinson. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Soundtradr. I've been at Soundtradr for 4 years and about 16 years of experience in synchronization, rights management, music supervision, and with a focus, obviously, and mostly in audiovisual. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Lau. I'm a veteran of the music industry for over 30 years. Started my career as a graduate of Berklee College of Music, and first half of my career I was a music supervisor and composer. Some notable things that I've worked on would be two Olympics for CBS, Courage the Cowardly Dog on the Cartoon Network, a bunch of projects for Warner Brothers Animation, and so on and so forth. And then halfway through my career, I was asked to join Warner Chappell to sort of help rebuild the area that services music to advertising and video games. After about 7.5 years there, I was asked to join and be a founding member of the indie publisher Roundhill Music, which I spent the last 10 years. Overseeing operations as the CEO, CTO, and that also includes overseeing the synchronization and creative rights management as well. So, Sammy, I guess we can start with, from your perspective, from when you started in the industry, from where it is now, what do you think the major changes and trends, or lack thereof changes, have occurred in the world of audiovisual and bringing music to audiovisual?
That's a very interesting question, which I'll ask you as well after I'm done answering, because we both come from a very, very similar background. And especially with my Latin America experience and your experience as well with Roundhill and Europe, I think that there has been a lot of changes in the world of audiovisual as well as rights management, even from when we first started and music by the pound was such a big thing in our industry, and now it's much more on the original side as well as retitling. When I started my career, I just remember us retitling everything. It was like the name of the song underscore and then the initials of our company, and how that had that practice has had such an impact in rights management and collection and catalog assessments and valuation. So the whole industry as a whole has really matured in a way that I'm really excited to be part of today. And one of the sectors that I have organically focused on, just by the need of the industry and having such a fantastic relationship with Latin America as well as countries outside of the US, is neighboring rights. So for the last few years, I have focused majority of my time collecting performer rights for neighboring. And not only that, but also kind of paving the way on how to collect and how the society relationships work in this ecosystem, and how do we protect and continue to create revenue for our performers and clients that have their sound recordings, or the sound recordings that they have worked on, because majority of them do work for hire, how they can monetize in both radio and audiovisual. So that has been quite a fascinating and difficult transition from the publishing to the master, not because of limitations of expertise, but mostly because the industry does not understand neighboring rights as a whole. There's still a lot of misunderstanding from the publishing side, and how that does not affect the master side as well as the performer against the writer. So it's been quite a fascinating transition, and being part of such a vertical of our industry that has been around for so many decades. but simultaneously has not been talked about or explored enough. So Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about like your experience with the publishing and how you feel how the neighboring rights has also kind of impacted that from your experience and your perspective?
Ooh, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, up until a few years ago, especially neighboring rights with regards to publishing, it was like, what is the, I guess the question is like, what is that? And I think that there's still a huge learning curve that is happening in the industry right now, with organizations like IFR that have popped up to help that educational part of it. Yeah, I mean, I think the music publishing area has evolved in a great deal, where traditionally music publishers only dealt with the composition, but now, as if you check the news every day, some publishing companies buying a label or acquiring the neighboring rights of an artist and so on, and because music publishers are trying to expand not only their market share, but their level of access to different rights. They're to truly become more rights management than to sort of be segmented. And a lot of times, if you can buy a recorded asset to a song that you may have a piece of, or hopefully 100% of, you just have a greater piece of the pie. You can leverage those assets, whether you are seeking investment and or down the road an exit strategy to sell to a larger company. And that also couples into the neighboring rights, because it's just more of there's a term of like collecting 360 degrees, where you sort of collect all of the gamuts, and the more things that you can, more rights that you can bundle together, or is what we say is, the bundle of rights, the more valuable your company becomes. And that also transitions into, or translates, I should say, into how you can license those rights to audiovisual works. Because if you can say, hey, we can quote you and we can license all of these segments, it just makes the users of those musics, the music supervisors and so on, makes their job a lot easier. And ultimately is, as Sammy, you and I always agree on, it's like, that's our job, is to make the people who need to use and license music, their jobs easier.
Absolutely. And just from the publishing side, because you and I talk about this again all the time, do you also feel like when we're talking about the neighboring rights side of the business, there's kind of like this fear of moving forward? Because we've dealt with it a lot as we were, educating the industry and educating performers and artists on how to collect as well as what they were entitled to. There's this massive fear that at least I felt on my end, that people get advances on the publishing side. So that's a very common practice in our industry, to get these advances. And of course, over the years with synchronization and radio plays, you kind of pay that back to either the publisher or the CMO/PRO. But do you feel like on the publishing side, there's still this little fear of the unknown in neighboring rights? Or do you feel that the industry is a lot more receptive to it right now?
I think up until recently, there was more of a fear of understanding, and as you and I both know, in certain countries, there are sort of limitations on who can collect, even though you might transfer your rights to, and there are tax implications, and again, it's the way each territory may, say how you can sell or someone can acquire your rights. But nowadays, I think, for the bigger players, there's a lot more understanding. There's a lot more risk. I think more and more companies are, like you said, like similar to publishing, are looking to give advances towards those neighboring rights for X amount of years and so on and so forth. So it's getting better every day.
Yeah, I mean, even for the publishing side, obviously that is a practice in our industry, that as soon as the catalog has traction, then there's an advance that comes at play. Obviously that for us right now, it's a little bit hard to see that revenue, to see that back end, that the historical data that allows for calculations and valuations to be made on the catalog. And I know that you've done this a ton at Round Hill as well, where you guys were constantly acquiring and looking into catalogs for either acquisition or for advances. For at least the neighboring rights perspective, I mean, there's still like a lot of that data missing. And from your perspective on the publishing side and being exposed to the neighboring rights as well, do you feel like on the audiovisual, on the synchronization, especially that not every single country recognize audiovisual for neighboring rights, as well as recognize performers that were born in the US because of the Rome Convention? How do you see the advanced language or the advanced world kind of playing out in the world of publishing against neighboring rights? Or if you feel like advances now might come as a whole, where, you know, it's covering both, not just the publishing, but also the master? And also keeping in mind that on the performer side, the performer has to collect that directly or through an agency. So the label might not necessarily have access to that income. So do you feel like we might change kind of the behavior of advances in the rights management world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, you know, especially music publishers are looking now more to grab as many of those rights that they can manage as possible, especially when this is what I'm about to say is kind of crosses over into the lack of data and the sort of evolution of that stuff. And, you know, with a lot of the platforms these days, whether it be, you know, Music Connect or the number of the other platforms right now, they're escaping me right now, where you can actually see what the DSPs, what's streaming, and you can go back many years, and even to the social media platforms. It's a lot easier to not only determine what the valuation of a publishing catalog is, but what the valuation of what an artist's respective neighboring rights are. So obviously it's a lot more difficult when you're looking at a new artist and or a new songwriter. Hopefully they're one and the same, because they may not have a track record. But if you're talking about a catalog that has been around for 10, 20, 30 years, and you have the ability to sort of, you know, they have in certain territories, they can reclaim their rights, especially here in the US after 35 years, based on some changes in the laws around 1978. They have another bite of the apple, so they can actually do another subsequent deal with their rights. And a lot of times the publishers are now asking, okay, what else do you have? Oh, you are, you know, said artist as well. Can we, you know, we'll pay you in advance, or we'll, you know, or if we're going to pay you X amounts of millions of dollars for your catalog, we can do the same for your neighboring rights as well. So absolutely. And the changes going on right now, every single company is doing that. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to grab as many of those rights in order to manage them. And again, to your point, which I was saying a couple of minutes ago, you know, that they have to pay the artist, so they have to pay an agency. You know, the companies are working really hard with various different, you know, experts in this area to try to work around and come up with solutions to that, so those rights can be secure when they do that.
Yeah, that is definitely a change that we have seen at not only Soundtradr, but as a whole, and watching the whole the universe of rights management really embracing neighboring rights, while simultaneously, because of what we recognize and don't recognize in the US, this huge confusion as to what can and cannot be done outside of the US as well as in the world. As you guys know, I'm here in Sao Paulo, and one of the agenda items here is to not only continue working on expanding those services for us, but how do we get better at forensically identifying and really bringing value to the industry on that front, because like you said, Michael, the lack of data, and perhaps not necessarily lack of data, but incorrect data just being fed into systems all over the world just makes the job so much more difficult to identify, to collect, to claim, because it's just missing data left and right, which then brings us to the MLC. And I'd love for us to touch a little bit on what is the MLC and what is its role in the US, and how does that impact creators all over the world. And I know that you are very involved with the MLC, so if you could give us a little bit of feedback and just a quick overview of what this entity does and how important it is.
Wow, that's going to be pretty hard to sort of consolidate in a couple of minutes, but I will do my best. The MLC stands for the Mechanical Licensing Collective. The Mechanical Licensing Collective was something that was mandatorily established under the Music Modernization Act that was passed a couple of years ago to help solve the problem for creators to properly get compensated by the digital services providers, i.e. Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that could be enough of a sort of a background on that. My involvement is I have been a founding member of the operations committee. There are a number of committees that were mandated by the Music Modernization Act to handle certain aspects of solving this problem. The operations committee was more about data and how things, quote unquote, should operate. There's another one with unclaimed and uncollected, and then another one is all for dispute. So it's really the structure of it has been really well sort of thought out and put together. What I can say about, how does mechanical licenses or licensing information relate to the creators and licensing of rights? Well, is Sammy, you and I both know that the completeness and the correctness of information, of song information is very lacking in the world. And even the performing rights organizations or the collective management organizations around there really are struggling with that as well. So the MLC is really the first organization based on the mandates under the Music Modernization Act to have a transparent database so people can not only see what is in there, they can also make claims against it and correct that data as well. And anybody can do that, anywhere from a big publisher to a self-published songwriter who may have music that is being played on Apple Music or Spotify and so on. The benefit of that is that, the hope is, or I should say my personal hope is that at the end of the day, whatever that might be, we have a better data set that we can use so folks that want to license music can utilize that data to determine who owns what pieces of that music. Especially in today's day and age, if, as you know, but as I'm not sure folks who are, watching this realize that the transactions of catalogs and rights in general, neighboring rights and master rights and so on, is at its largest right now than it's ever been, because people are getting their rights back. And with majors like Universal and other publishers spending hundreds of millions of dollars for catalogs that you see every week. That data has a habit of not being updated as quickly as the industry needs it to, or the folks that are choosing to need to license that music that it needs to. But what the MLC does, because it's open and because it's transparent, my hope is that it will be updated quicker as well. And also the benefit of that database that is being sort of pruned and updated and corrected is that other platforms, technology platforms, other PROs and CMOs as well can utilize that data as hopefully like a foundation of like, oh, okay, this is where our discrepancies are. We can fix it. And or other music platforms can also build products on top of that, and to help the creators of audiovisual works have better ease of use in a more efficient way to license music, to find music, some similar things that is happening at Soundtradr as well. Hopefully that was succinct enough.
Well, it's funny because you touched in audiovisual, and I think audiovisual is one of the reasons that, you know, we see so much traction and success in rights management. And I was just having a meeting before I got here, and one of the music supervisors was just saying how it took them 6 months to get a song cleared because the label who had the sound recording did not know that they actually had lost it to a sale 10 years ago, and they were scrambling trying to figure out how to get approvals, and it turns out that they didn't even have the correct data themselves, and they were not able to guide the music supervisors into how do you even license this track, which is about to go into a sync. So the music supervisor had to really dig in, and it took them 6 months to figure out who owned the sound recording because the data was broken. So it's exciting to hear that we're going to be able to have a system that not only will allow for better data that can be used worldwide, but simultaneously allow the publishers as well as the labels to fix it as they go. Now, is there a criteria for that data to be updated? Because if you think about it, then if anyone can change, then again, the problem is not solved. We create another issue. So is there a criteria of who can update the data, or how does it work?
Yes. Yeah, there's a series of, and I don't know the actual specifics, but there is a series of validation steps. There's a whole team that makes sure that if someone is claiming a share of a song or wants to update something, the team at the MLC does go through its rigorous steps of validating and determining, is this the proper rights holder? So yeah, no, it's a very important question that you asked. But yeah, not anybody can just update it as well. Let me ask you something. Obviously the whole point of putting music in audiovisual works is for everybody to make money. The creators to license music, and that will subsequently result in earning income for those people that are creating that product. But at the end of the day, the rights holders and the creators of the music that's being licensed. So, tell me about your experience with, how the cue sheets are important to this process. I'll just leave it at that. I'll just let you talk about that.
Okay, we have an hour minimum. Cue sheets are extremely important, if not the heart that pumps the blood into our beautiful back-end industry. At the end of the day, this is a topic that even I have been discussing a lot with our clients here in Sao Paulo, is who's responsible for the cue sheets, who's responsible for grabbing that data after synchronization, because there's an entire process up to the point where you receive that money on the back end, which is obviously the synchronization, the licensing, and then after you license, you have to create a cue sheet or get the cue sheet so the CMO or the PRO has that data to properly match the audiovisual to the works that were used, so they can then generate back end. And a lot of times the information either doesn't get put in on a cue sheet, or the information goes to the cue sheet incorrectly, which is the issue of neighboring rights. Because neighboring rights uses a code called ISRC, where the publishing uses a code called ISWC, and the cue sheet is standardized by SUSAC. And currently there is no fields for you to add the master data. So when a song gets synchronized, while you do get the ISWC identifying the composition, it's missing the ISWC to identify the master. So a lot of times that gets retitled or simply does not get matched to the audiovisual, which then does not generate revenue and just falls into what we know as a black box. So cue sheets are extremely important. They're the heart and soul of the back end, and that's how everything starts, gets reported to the CMO, and then generates what we know as royalties. So there's a lot of conversations around the cue sheet and how important and how standardized that is on the publishing side. But then when you look at the neighboring rights side, it's missing the master data. So for the CMOs that do recognize neighboring rights as well as neighboring rights in audiovisual, that entire ecosystem is missing of data that then allows the CMOs to identify in a more proactive way, instead of the agencies like Soundtradr having to mine that data and try to manually figure it out what matches to what, so then we can issue the ISRC and then collect on behalf of the label. So long story short, cue sheets are the heart of the beginning of the rights management world, and everything that we need to make sure and ensure that happens in order to bring value to the back end.
Right. So we both agree that historically there really has not been synergy between, let's say, publishing and label information with regards to cue sheets, because historically, at least here in the US, there's no performing right on the master recording, so there really didn't need to be any of that information. And there really is, I think even till today around this world, there's still lack of forethought in, hey, if we do this, everybody can get paid. And again, which directly ties into neighboring rights, because if we all can come together and create synergy between both sides, it will be everybody will get paid, versus like the amount of, new companies and teams trying to set up, like you said, try to identify and match. If we can start from as close of perfection as possible, hopefully we could get paid.
And like you and I, talk about this more often than we should. It's the publishing and the neighboring there, and the audiovisual world, and the front end and the back end. These are not silos. This is actually, this is part of an entire ecosystem that is extremely important and very healthy and wealthy. So these are not, we're not looking at silos on the publishing side and on the silo on the neighboring right side. This is like this is two sides of the same coin, and the coin being the audiovisual, and then you have each side the publishing and then the neighboring, and then you have the currency, which is the synchronization. So this is all part of an economy that somehow, because of lack of understanding and perhaps even how the industry works, sometimes it's looked as a silo, but then we go back to the cue sheet. Cue sheet is the heart of everything. So without the ISRC data for the master side, then we cannot identify that sound recording, the audiovisual that has played perhaps in Latin America or in Europe or in Japan. So it just, this is a much deeper conversation that requires a lot of heads coming together and really advocating for a more unified system, just all together.
Right. So on that note, I know our time is running out. One last question for you with this topic, this really big topic. What are what are a couple of takeaways that we can convey to the folks that are watching this about how things can be improved with, again, properly licensing, to properly, the folks that are creating this music can properly be, paid?
It's
words of advice.
Words of advice. And I've been giving that a lot here in Sao Paulo this week. And it's funny because what I say here would be a different advice that I give in the US. But I think that overall is we have a body of professionals called music supervisors, and they are extremely important in this process because they do all of this due diligence. And obviously that we have the gaps, like we talked about the cue sheet, we talked about the gaps within the data being correct. But since this is an audiovisual conversation, I think that, really relying on the music supervisor and relying on submitting them the correct data, especially when you're looking at synchronization, they will be your best friend when it comes to ensuring that that specific composition and that sound recording is fully cleared. They have 100% of the data, which in some countries doesn't even add up to 100%, but that's a complete story for a different time. They will be able to at least ensure that that pie is whole and it's not missing pieces or missing flour, to be able to synchronize it properly and then submit the data correctly to the broadcasters, which then you get a copy of that cue sheet, and you yourself can, with your agency or your publisher, basically send that data to the PROs as well, to ensure that everything falls into the correct pool for collection. So without getting too much, detail on what is a music supervisor and what they do, with the understanding that we know their function, which is to supervise the use of just composition in the audiovisual, whether that be original or a synchronization, working with people that understand the importance and the step of each way, like I said, of the coin and of the economy. I think that we are truly able to work in a more efficient way. But having said that, let me throw the question back to you and let me know what you think and what that would look like in your world.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you say. And thankfully there are a number of platforms that have popped up, one of them being BMAT, which actually can assist in identifying, so everybody gets paid and where the gaps are and so on and so forth. And I think we can't rely on them 100%, but I think we're at a very interesting nexus in the industry where these platforms are popping up to help us collect and identify, and not only that, but it also helps to sort of reinforce the deficits. So even though it is a help we can sort of collect the stuff that might have slipped through the cracks, it also is blatant that, hey, we have a problem in our current system, so how do we fix that? I think that I think people need to be willing to communicate. People need to take time to properly say and be mindful of, from the bookend of the process, the soup to nuts process. Look, if we take the time to get it right here, we won't have to waste our time at the very end, and get called from someone you've licensed music from and say, hey, I never got my performance or my neighboring rights royalties. And it's like I have the saying that if it takes an extra 5 minutes to do something at the top, do it, because it could save you hours on the back end, when it rears its ugly head. But yeah, other than that, on the same page with you. It's cool. I think this has been a great conversation, Sammy, and always a pleasure to talk with you, and great to speak to you folks, and hopefully this was not only educational but hopefully a little entertaining as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Michael, so much for joining. And I agree with you. I just hope that this really just opens the floor for more conversations and more questions, because obviously we didn't even scratch the surface here. We didn't even get close to the surface. But I think that, as long as we're starting the conversation and we're really, coming together as a community that cares, I think that's where the changes can come for the better. And it takes a village, and we are a village, and we can do this.
Yep, exactly. You've with that last statement, I think you've said about or hinted to 4 or 5 song titles that, let's make the world a better place kind of thing. So, well, thanks again. And
But
see you soon.